The 2024 Nobel Literature Prize was awarded to the Korean writer Han Kang. She is the first South Korean and Asian woman to win the prize. The result surprised many. In this video, let's explore the reason why Han Kang, a comparatively young Korean writer, could bring this prestigious award home. Before presenting the reasons, let's delve into how her childhood shaped her literature journey and her own perception of her work. Born in Gwangju in 1970, Han Kang grew up surrounded by books, as her father was a struggling young novelist. Amid her family's financial hardships, Han recalled that, although she had to switch primary schools 5 times, she didn't resent it because she always felt protected by the presence of books during her childhood. At the age of 12, a secret memorial album documenting the 1980 Gwangju Uprising profoundly shaped her worldview. This pro-democracy movement was brutally suppressed by the military with extreme cruelty. Han remembers always writing as a teenager and decided to become a writer at the age of 14. Initially, her writings consisted of a few sentences in her journal, but by 19, she was crafting short stories, eventually progressing to longer works. Her path to become a writer was clear from a young age. Han later studied Korean literature at Yonsei University and briefly worked as a reporter for 3 years before fully committing to writing. Even her earlier works were lauded for its precision and emotional depth. When asked how she learned to write such evocative fiction and poetry, she responded, "They just come to me. It's like an invasion or intrusion." Like many authors who avoid dissecting their works, Han Kang frequently talks about her books in depth. The Vegetarian. Han's most well-known work, The Vegetarian, explores a woman's rebellion against societal norms, culminating in intense tragedy through the simple act of becoming a vegetarian. Han's international breakthrough came when the novel won the 2016 Man Booker International Prize. Many believe this work contributed the most for her Nobel Prize. International readers might find it perplexing that a dietary change could incite such dramatic responses in the book. To understand this, one must recognize the cultural context. When The Vegetarian was first published nearly 20 years ago, South Korea's historically uniform eating habits and family structures made such a change seem like a severe betrayal of societal norms. In multicultural societies like the US or Europe, diverse eating habits coexist due to immigration culture. Similarly, in countries like China or India, regional dietary preferences vary greatly. For example, in China, tofu pudding is a common breakfast dish, but its preparation varies by region. People in the north typically eat it savory, while those in the south prepare it sweet. It's common for couples from these regions to start families together, especially since the economic reforms and opening up in the 1980s. As a result, sharing meals with differing culinary traditions around the same family table is perfectly normal. However, in South Korea and Japan, societal expectations enforce a higher degree of uniformity, making any deviation, like a wife becoming vegetarian, appear extreme or even insane. Thus, a traditional wife suddenly becoming a vegetarian is a sign of craziness. It's even a crime, step by step, escalated to an illness. As depicted in the book, the main character's mother said to her, "If you don't eat meat, people will eat you." Ironically, even Hong Kong herself seems like a great example of a gentle and graceful woman that Korean society successfully trains. Her calm demeanor and soft tone was shown since her first blog in her early 20s. The always quiet and tranquil personality throughout years almost seem unreal. In the Asian American Writers Workshop interview, when asked about the English translation problem regarding the title of her work, The White Book, she responded in gentle voice while looking down to the floor, "When I write, I don't think about the translation. I don't even think about the readers." This is probably the only sentence she said among all her interviews that can show a little personality. But right after saying that, she added a sentence, "I'm sorry," with a shy smile. Her tone was so soft, cautious, and even apologetic. Also, for moments like receiving the Nobel Prize winner notice call,
Hello?
she sounds almost too calm and unemotional. When asked about how to celebrate it,
do you have any ideas on how you will celebrate this Nobel Prize?
She answered on the phone,
After this phone call, I'd like to have tea with, I don't drink, so
Okay.
I'm going to have tea with my son, and I will celebrate it quietly tonight.
Her personality is a stark contrast to the writing in The Vegetarian, which is raw, unsettling, and even horrifying. In the book, she depicts common details in a severely brutal way to expose the terror women face in both their families and the society. This contrast between her demeanor and her writing signals that the most creative power can be fueled in the most reflective and peaceful mind. Also, appearing to be gregarious and amiable doesn't mean not having sad eyes, staring angrily at the distorted society, while screaming loudly from her heart. After the announcement of the Nobel Prize, the book, The Vegetarian, has triggered heated dispute, which mainly surrounded the English translation of it. Han responded in an interview, as she recognized, the disputes were mainly about two things: the incorrect translation and the copyright. Regarding the incorrect translation, she said because she was immersed in writing her new book, Human Acts, she only used 3 hours to proofread the translator's draft. But all the problems were corrected word by word already in the new version. Han pointed out that the translator didn't injure the work, but improved the work. She restated that the translator and the author are not enemy. Regarding the copyright, people argued about who benefited most from the success of the book, published in English. Han acknowledged that the dispute is mostly associated with the word success, but she found it an interesting perspective because she didn't associate this book with the word success at all. When she was writing this book, she had an injury and was experiencing some personal situations. It was a difficult time for her, so the word success never came across her mind. She didn't even imagine it to be published. Human Acts. While The Vegetarian brought her international acclaim, Human Acts holds a special place in Han's heart. When asked which book she would recommend, Han consistently chooses Human Acts, describing it as the work that transformed her the most. The novel explores the aftermath of the Gwangju uprising through the perspective of its victims and survivors. Han spent a large part of her childhood in Gwangju, and 4 months after she moved away from there, the 1988 uprising happened, a horrible massacre in which all citizens who are against the state were killed. The killing lasted for 10 entire days. Since Han was a kid, she found it overwhelming to look at human beings. She always questions how human can be so cruel and noble at the same time. Humanity has such a broad spectrum. She said, all my life, I walked between these two extremes. I want to embrace this world and life, but there are certain points we can't. In the memorial album, she saw the gruesome scene of the injured, but also people who waited in long line to donate blood. Han saw a photo depicting a woman being shot after donating blood. That woman could have just stayed at home. Why did she come out in such danger to save others? She mentioned it's always difficult for her to accept this world or life. So she had to dig deep into herself and penetrate to the doubt to write. Consequently, she injected so much emotions in this book that she felt so sad and painful during the process. Since collecting materials, she was already shaken and toned. When writing chapter 2, She shut herself in a small studio and was crying every day. At one point, she'd cry for an hour after writing for 3 lines, and then sit for hours without being able to do anything before heading for home. When writing the last part of the book, Han used a lot of you when she writes about the character Dong Ho, as if she's calling to him. She felt that even if Dong Ho is dead, but when she called for him, he's still standing in front of her. She explained, "I use both imaginary and actual events in this book, but even if it's imaginary scene, I experienced it as if it's real." Han said she had to think about those who died when writing. She had a lot of nightmares every day and always felt as if someone was standing behind her when she writes in terror. The array of emotional outbursts when she was writing the book could also be the reason why her narration seemed surreal, visceral, and fragmented, sometimes even a little bit incoherent and all over the place. But it is exactly this unique style that makes her work intensely powerful. The famous Chinese writer Hua Yu also praised Han's unique writing style. He stated that Han knows how to play to her strength because she isn't the best at telling stories, which can be seen from her narration in The Vegetarian, where she used 3 people's perspective to complete the telling of one story. But she is a master at depicting details. The detail in We Do Not Apart about a dying mother in Jeju massacre putting her broken finger into her young daughter's mouth to feed her blood and using her last breath to save her child is so touching and unforgettable. Thus, she focused on using vivid and striking details throughout the book, and that's also why the Nobel Committee defined her work as prose. Though painful to write, Han still believes that writers have a responsibility to document and interpret historical events, particularly those that expose humanity's vulnerabilities. She brought up in an interview that the suicide rate of the massacre survivors was 11%, an astronomical number compared to common suicide rates. That means the tragedy didn't end when the end of the massacre. People were still fighting the trauma long after the incident. In this sense, they are not only the victims, but also honorable fighters. Division between life and death is very exacting, cruel, and concise. Those who were not photographed cannot testify they have lived. So, drowning in sadness and disbelief of humanity, she had to find an explanation, a way out. Her solution is the role of the soul. She feels if the corpses are there, then the souls are there. But the souls are very fragile, so it's the responsibilities of those who live to do something about it. In her own words, "I want to move forward. There is no way but the soul. I have the responsibility as a writer to write about the soul, despite all the horrified experience and the nightmare I had." Now we finally reach the section regarding the reasons why the 2024 Nobel Literature Prize was given to Han Kang. First, as Betty's Bilibili commentary points out, Han's success benefited greatly from Korea Literature Translation Institute's dedicated investments in talent and capital for literature export. Since the 1980s, Korea had been trying to publish Korean works internationally. In the last 3 years, Korean literature export supported by government projects from the Korean Literature Translation Institution had a 15% year-on-year growth, which is a significant number. The second reason lies in Korean writers' choice of topic. Some critics also specified that the activism in Korean literature topics was actually catalyzed by the history of the Korean language. It was only in the 1970s that the Korean language gained widespread adoption by the newer generation. In the past, older generations mostly used Chinese characters in writing. The younger generation, who didn't know Chinese characters well, don't have the foundation to write in traditional ways or explore more deeply rooted historical issues in Korea. So many of the works focus on studying the recent social problems, and the writing style is more colloquial than formal. Because the Korean language is new, the younger generation writers extend the revolution in language to their topics to challenge authority and convention. The power structure in Korea, no matter in family or in workplace, was always male-dominated, but new generation female novelists are not afraid to point out their pain and struggle. Even if their voice can be sometimes shallow and colloquial, the struggle is real, and so universal that it can break through the cliché quickly and create widespread resonance. Their mission to break convention and existing power structure is also a reason why they can be seen on the global stage. Among those newer generation writers, Han walks at the very front of the league to overthrow the high fence in Korean patriarchy. She attempts to directly eradicate the root problem, which is the uniformity of the society. Thirdly, let's focus on Han Kang specifically. What's her core belief as a writer, and what goal is she trying to accomplish ultimately? According to the Nobel Prize Committee, Han exposes the fragility of life and historical trauma by creating a profound exploration of human existence. The Yale Review also pointed out Han's commitment to making suppressed memories and untold stories legible for contemporary and future generations. The International Business Times recognized her ability to give voice to marginalized individuals and illuminate unforgotten histories. Indeed, it's her courage to confront the legacy of state violence and its lasting impact on communities that offered the readers a way to mourn collective traumas. The path is not easy. Taking on the heavy responsibility to articulate suffering means taking on the burden of the grief itself. After countless sleepless nights and terror and river of tears, she still believes in the moral duty of literature to articulate the suffering, to bring the collective oblivion to light again and again, and to facilitate the understanding across cultural and temporal divides. Why does she do it? It's probably an inner calling since she was a little girl, formed when she looked through the memorial album full of human corpses. It could also be a spirit passing down from her family when her father was a young writer living in Gwangju. Han mentioned in the Louisiana Channel's interview, though her father rarely discusses writing with her, when she was writing the book Human Acts, her father said to her, "It must be hard on you, but please finish it." Her core belief can probably be derived from her own words that the souls of the dead are very fragile, so it's responsibilities of those who live.